A $600,000 truck, a driver who hasn't seen his own bed in 58 days, and a road that only exists for about 10 weeks a year before it melts back into a lake. That's not an exaggeration. Some of the routes ice road truckers drive are, quite literally, frozen water. Roads that get built every winter and unbuilt every spring. And the trucks that run them aren't just trucks. For 2 months at a time, they're the only home a driver has. This is what it actually looks like to live inside one. Most people picture a truck sleeper as a glorified back seat, a cot behind the driver's chair, maybe a curtain for privacy, a milk crate for a nightstand. That image is about 20 years out of date. Today's top-end sleeper cabs run closer to a studio apartment on wheels. A real bed, a kitchen, a bathroom, sometimes even a shower. Manufacturers like Peterbilt, Kenworth and Freightliner build these things specifically for drivers who are going to be gone for weeks, not days. When the build gets fully custom, Harvard-style cabinetry, a residential-grade mattress, a hidden shower stall, a dining nook that folds into a desk. The price tag on the whole rig can land close to $600,000. For most trucking, that kind of spend would be overkill. A regional driver home every night doesn't need a bedroom on wheels. For ice road trucking, it's survival equipment, because the job itself is unlike almost anything else in the industry. Winter, in places like Canada's Northwest Territories and Alaska's North Slope, temperatures drop far enough that lakes and rivers freeze solid enough to carry the weight of fully loaded trucks. Ice engineers measure the thickness at points along the route, mark safe corridors with flags, and for a short window, companies use those frozen surfaces as highways, hauling fuel, food, and heavy equipment to communities and work sites that have no other way to get supplies once summer ends, and the barges stop running. The catch is that window is shrinking. Drivers who've worked routes like the Tibbet to Contoito Ice Road remember seasons stretching 12 to 14 weeks back in the 90s. Now it's closer to 8 to 10. Warmer winters mean less time for the ice to thicken and more pressure to move cargo fast before it melts. On some seasons, crews are racing to move thousands of loads in under 3 months, working against a deadline set entirely by the weather. There's no pushing the schedule back. Once the ice starts to go soft, the road is simply gone, whether the cargo made it through or not, which means every single day matters. And every single day that driver is living in the truck. Start with the obvious problem. There's nowhere to pull over. On a normal long-haul route, a driver low on sleep can find a truck stop, a rest area, a diner with decent coffee and a parking lot to nap in. On an ice road, none of that exists. The routes run through open tundra and frozen lake systems, sometimes hundreds of miles from the nearest town. No gas stations, no fast food, no cell service for long stretches. If something breaks down, help isn't 20 minutes away. It might be hours, and at negative 40 degrees, hours can be the difference between an inconvenience and an emergency. So the truck has to carry everything. Extra fuel filters in case the diesel starts to gel in the road and clog the valves. Spare parts for a rig that's operating in conditions it was never really designed for. Through a trip with no stores along the way. Some drivers even carry satellite phones because a cell tower 90 miles away isn't going to help when the nearest one is that far in the other direction too. Every item on board earns its place, there's no running back for something forgotten. And then there's the ice itself, which has its own rules that have nothing to do with anything else on the road. A loaded truck can weigh up to 50 tons. Ice that's properly thick can hold that weight, but only while the truck keeps moving. The pressure wave a moving vehicle creates actually helps distribute the load across the surface, spreading the weight out ahead of and behind the truck instead of letting it concentrate in one spot. Stop, and that wave disappears. The full weight sits in one place, pressing down on however thick the ice happens to be right there. Drivers talk about the ice groaning and cracking beneath them at speed, which sounds like the moment you want to slam the brakes, except braking is often the worst thing you can do. what you'd expect. Too fast, and the truck creates a wave in the water beneath the ice that can crack the surface from underneath. Too slow, and the weight sits too long in one place. Drivers have to hold a narrow band of speed for hours at a time on a surface they can't fully see through, trusting measurements taken by someone else earlier that week. So picture what that means for a driver's day. Hours of total concentration watching the surface ahead for cracks or dark patches that might mean thinner ice, judging speed against conditions that can shift from 1 mile to the next, all while it's dark for most of the shift because winter is far north barely sees daylight at all. Then, when the driving is finally done, the only place to decompress is a cab of a hallway, parked somewhere on a road made of frozen water, with wind outside that can drop exposed skin into frostbite in under 10 minutes. That's the part the truck has to solve for. Not comfort in the luxury sense, comfort in the sense of keeping a person functioning for 2 months straight, making sound decisions on ice that doesn't forgive mistakes. Start with the heat because everything else depends on it.
Hello everybody. This is going to be a video of going down Cabbage Hill.
Standard truck engines aren't built to idle for 2 months in Arctic conditions without help. Extra cab heaters and engine heaters get installed specifically for this kind of run, because if the engine itself gets too cold, it may not start again. And a truck that won't start on an ice road isn't a broken down vehicle. It's a driver stranded in weather that can kill. So before a truck even reaches the ice, outfitters spend thousands of dollars just prepping it for the cold. Heaters, extra insulation packed into the walls and floor, fuel additives that keep diesel from turning to slush in the tank overnight. Inside, the sleeper compartment is where all that engineering pays off. On the high end, it's not a bunk, it's a real bedroom. Some builds include a queen-size mattress instead of a truck-issue cot, barely wide enough to roll over in. There's usually a small refrigerator, sometimes a microwave, occasionally a stovetop, because 2 months of gas station food isn't sustainable, and there often aren't gas stations to begin with. The best equipped rigs have a compact bathroom tucked behind the seats. Toilet, sink, and in the most expensive builds, an actual shower. Because after a full shift in freezing temperatures, being able to get warm water on your body is not a luxury. It's the difference between sleeping well and lying awake, still cold, still tense from the day. There's storage for winter gear because the clothing alone for negative 40-degree conditions takes up real space. Layered coats, insulated boots, gloves rated for conditions most people never experience outside of a chest freezer. Extra everything in case the first set gets wet. There's often a television or entertainment setup, not for indulgence, but because 2 months of silence with nothing to fill it can wear on a person's mind in ways that have nothing to do with physical danger. Some drivers keep books, some keep photos taped up near the bunk. Small things that make 40 feet of steel feel less like a machine and more like a place someone actually lives. And there's the auxiliary power unit, a smaller, separate generator that lets the cab run heat, lights and appliances without keeping the massive main engine running all night. Idling a semi-engine for 8 hours burns through diesel fast and adds wear the truck doesn't need out in conditions already hard on the equipment. The APU solves that quietly, letting the living space function like an actual home without treating the engine like a furnace that never gets to rest. Put it together and you start to see why the price climbs the way it does. A standard sleeper cab alone might run somewhere in the range of $50,000 to $60,000. Add the truck itself and you're commonly looking at $200,000 to $300,000 for a new rig with basic sleeping quarters. But push into full custom territory. The queen mattress, the built-in shower, the hardwood-style cabinetry, the extended cab length that gives a driver actual walking room instead of a slot to squeeze through sideways. And top-tier builds have been priced as high as $500,000 to $600,000. Not because the extra $100,000 buys more horsepower, because it buys livability, and on an ice road, livability is what keeps a driver sane enough to make good decisions for 2 straight months.
Okay guys, here we go again.
Because here's what people underestimate about this job. The physical danger gets all the attention, but the isolation is its own kind of hazard, and it's a quieter one. Trucks sometimes travel in loose convoys for safety, but a lot of the actual driving is solitary. Hours pass with nothing but headlights on white and the sound of the engine. No radio signal for long stretches. No one to talk to except whoever's on the other end of a satellite phone, if the situation calls for one. Drivers who've done multiple seasons describe it less like a job and more like a deployment. You go in knowing you're gone for the better part of 2 months, and everything about your daily rhythm gets rebuilt around a machine that's also your bedroom, kitchen, and only shelter from weather that can genuinely kill you if you're caught outside unprepared for more than a few minutes. That's part of why the pay is what it is. A driver willing to take on the isolation and the risk can make significant money in a single winter season, sometimes close to what other drivers make in a full year, compressed into roughly 90 days. It sounds like a shortcut to a good paycheck until you account for what those 90 days actually cost. Most ice road truckers don't work the other 9 months of the year. This isn't a job on top of a normal life. For that window, it basically replaces one entirely, and the paycheck has to stretch to cover the months when there's no ice left to drive on. And the trucks themselves reflect that trade-off. Every feature inside that expensive sleeper cab is really answering the same question. How do you keep a person physically capable and mentally intact when their only shelter for 60 days is 40 feet long and parked in some of the harshest conditions on the planet? The heater keeps the fuel from gelling and the driver from freezing overnight. The mattress keeps sleep quality high enough that fatigue doesn't turn into a fatal mistake on ice that's already unstable by nature. The shower keeps morale from collapsing after week 3, when everything smells like diesel and the sun barely comes up before it sets again. The refrigerator means real food, instead of whatever survives 2 months in a cooler bag wedged behind the seat. None of it is decoration. It's infrastructure for keeping a human being functional in an environment that is actively working against that, 1 degree below zero at a time, which is maybe the most interesting thing about a $600,000 sleeper cab. It's not a status symbol built to impress anyone because there's genuinely no one out there to impress. There's no showroom on the Dalton Highway. No one pulls up next to a rig on a frozen lake to admire the paint job or ask about the financing. The money goes somewhere much less glamorous and much more essential, into making sure a person can survive being completely alone in temperatures that can kill in minutes for the length of an entire season, and come out the other side able to do it again next winter and the winter after that. The ice road itself will be gone in a matter of weeks, melted back into whatever lake or river it came from. No trace it was ever a highway at all. By summer, boats will cross water where trucks once hauled 50 tons of fuel and equipment, and there will be nothing to show a road was ever there. The truck is the only part of the whole operation built to last. Everything a driver needs for 2 months of total isolation has to fit inside 40 feet of steel and insulation, because out there, that steel and insulation is the only thing standing between them and a landscape that doesn't care whether they make it home. So the next time you see one of these rigs roll past, parked at a truck stop in the off-season, looking almost ordinary, almost forgettable, it's worth remembering what that cab was actually built to survive. Not a long drive, a winter, 2 months of darkness, isolation and ice that groans under 50 tons of steel, with a bedroom, a kitchen, and sometimes a shower packed into the only space that mattered. Would you take 3 months of that kind of isolation for a year's worth of pay? Or is there no amount of money that makes sense once you actually picture living in a truck cab at -40, completely alone, for 8 straight weeks?